talking to you. We about to have a house party. Welcome to the Re-Emancipation of Social Dance podcast, a prelude to the world premiere of an immersive dance theater experience created by me, Raja Feather Kelly, with Philadelphia's finest, Yolanda Wisher. Listen in as 5 multifaceted dancers tell the evolving story of social dance and the impact that it's had on the people and cultures of Philadelphia. Come on in and let's move.
Testing.
Hello.
It's been 2 years.
It's been
2 years.
It's been 2 years. It's been 2 years.
Oh my God.
It's pretty remarkable that we've made it. Pretty exciting.
I feel like I'm a different person than when we started. I remember thinking, how am I going to do this project that's so much about embodiment? And I felt at the time that we started doing the project that I wanted to be more embodied in my own work as a writer, as a performer. And I was just so very much in the mental realm of all the work, like a lot of logistical, administrative, grant writing. But I'm also now realizing how prescient that process was, that it's like a dream state when you're coming up with the idea of the project. And for me,
it's a process of remembering,
exactly.
to remember, to put the pieces back together.
Yes.
That feels right.
Yes.
I always get very terrified at the end of processes because I just want to stay in it. And I feel lucky enough, I feel that I owe it to myself to make sure I am able to collaborate and be in rooms that excite me and that make me want to give my best self, and this room is certainly one of them. But then it makes it harder to close the chapter out. You know, it's not done. The work is definitely not done, but this chapter today will certainly come to a close, and I am not looking forward to that, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I feel like, the way that the dancers' stories have evolved from those first interviews to now feels like we're just starting something. Like, we've cracked it open and their stories are still going on. Right? Like, their stories are still happening and going to grow beyond this in ways that I find really exciting to be able to want to witness. The way Layla talks about witnessing, the role of witness.
Yes.
I feel like I've been a witness to something that started in my house with those interviews with you on Zoom to now seeing, like, for instance, yesterday, Jermaine at the end joining some friends who had come to pick her up after the performance and who had seen it. She was aglow. She was just lit up in a way that I don't think I've ever seen Jermaine's face like that.
Wow.
I mean, Jermaine was part of the very beginning of this project, and there was like a seriousness with which she kind of helped me kind of write that grant, and she challenged me to kind of think about, well, what is underneath this idea of re-emancipation of social dance?
Right.
What is at stake when we're talking about very real things like liberation and feeling free in your body as a Black person in this world that we're living in right now.
Right.
But to see also the joy that was cultivated through this project in the bodies of the dancers, in their camaraderie with one another. All of our relationships have grown through this project. And then, of course, the audience is having a moment, too.
Yeah, I wonder what relationship the word listening has to do with witnessing. They feel similar because that is something that I'm thinking a lot about. I'm thinking about how do you write that down? How do you write about a process that is a process of listening? Because I think, like I said to you, and I said to the performers in many of those first interviews when they were like, well, what is it? And I was like, I can't totally tell you what it is. I can tell you what my questions are. I can tell you what I'm interested in, but this for me is about research. And as a director and a choreographer, listening is what I have to do in order to figure out how the pieces might go together. And I still feel like that now during the performances, when I'm in the performances, and I'm running sound, which can be a little dangerous because I'm like, I can't just be sitting here listening, but then listening also makes me think of our goal, which was to have this work of performance be an extension of the book. And there is something that feels equally as performative as it does feel like literature or essays about the Re-Emancipation, and that to me feels very special and exciting. And thinking about where we started and where we are now on the eve of our final performance. The other night, we were talking about the experience of one section in the show, which we call Chemical Shift, and it's maybe 2/3 of the way in, and it's after Jermaine goes and it's the rain and I speak. Anyway, you talked about, in a funny, jokingly way, talked about having this moment with your son, and that he was maybe a little fussy about it, but you were like, this is a core memory, you know, this moment together. And that had me, I was in this moment right now, it's like, oh, I think that's what, and don't get me wrong, I love all of the projects that I do. Some of them have a very similar nature, you know, it's some of it's work. And then the work of my company, you know, it's all special. But this is like a little bit, you know, it's not my company, it's not my town. It is now. It is now. But because of so much newness for me in terms of both asking for my process to be invited into the room and then asking to learn about others' processes and trying to pick up on them and weave them together so that it feels cohesive and people feel protected and people feel safe and people feel excited to be risky, that it has unlocked for me like a new core memory. Just because I'm like, wow, we did what we said we were gonna do. And it's not that I was ever unsure if
I was.
I knew we were gonna do it, for sure. I knew we were gonna do it. I didn't know exactly how, but that's not new to me, so that's not scary. But I knew we were gonna get here, I knew we were gonna get here. And the process has just opened up new synapses and new pathways and new ways of thinking for me that it is now. I can't not tie some of that newness specifically to the process of working with Jermaine and Ra and Mark and Layla and you and Nikki and even the folks outside of that process. I'm thinking about Katie, I'm thinking about Patrice, I'm thinking about Rick, I'm thinking about Itzohan, just people who have had to come in a bit later in the game and understand what we were doing, so much so that they can invest in it. Right. And that to me means something when folks who are coming in are like, all right, I'm with this, I'm down with this, and let's make this happen. There's something about that too that can't be denied or not remarked on, and all of that creates this core memory for me.
Whenever he danced, he took up all the space.
Can you imagine a dance where little kids are committing suicide every night and then they just bounce back up? People that invented this, it must have made them feel invincible.
I was thinking a lot about Mark's monologue about Lao Tzu, this wise person who, you know, the young person challenges to an archery battle. And at the end, he's kind of saying, I'm an archer without archery. You know, I don't need a bow, I don't need an arrow. He can kind of shoot a bird out the sky with just his mind.
Ugh.
And I was thinking, like, what does it mean to be a writer without writing? Which I felt like was in some sense what we did, right? Like, you were closer to it, the process of pulling the weaving of everybody's stories together. But there was a way in which, like, folks have kept insisting to me, you have written this, or you have done this in some way. And I've always been like, no, they wrote their own stories. Raja did some weaving and writing. But there is a way in which, yes, I wrote the grant. I wrote an email to you. It was like, hey, we should get together. There was some writing. Like, what is writing, essentially, is not necessarily just pen to paper. A lot of writing, poems for me, happens just in my own mind.
For sure.
Right? Just an idea that comes up that I keep in my head and let marinate. And that's a form of writing. This whole experience felt a little bit like that. Archery without archers.
Yeah.
Writing without writing. And I think I've learned more and more in my career as I get older, how that distance is really helpful. How that distance is a form of listening, like you were describing. And that there's a sense of also a ceding or a losing of control, or allowing yourself to lose control, or to share control in a way that feels almost kind of superhuman mind control, Jedi mind trick.
Yeah, I love that. That story gets to me too, and I do think that you wrote this. You know, if I think of writing as a practice of materializing or realizing, bringing something into fruition, and also the more spiritual parts of writing, which is that they're spells, you know. And so to think about, you know, I'm writing this spell.
The other day, actually, I was talking to my friend. I was like, I'm no longer calling grants. I can't do it anymore.
What are you calling
I
them?
have to call them manifestation plans.
Ooh!
And I'm reminded of that in this because in some ways you're like, here's my manifestation plan. Like, here's how I'm gonna work to manifest this into being. Here's how I'm gonna realize this. And then here it is.
You know, it wouldn't be this without what you have done. And yeah, I mean, it's so the project is so especially collaborative in that way, where I am thinking about all the people who laid their hands on this, and the idea of laying hands too just is of the work.
Yes.
And when process and product are one and the same, I am in a kind of heaven. And so every metaphor, every analogy, every illustration of what we're doing is also what I think people experience. And you did that. Here it is. You know, we thought about the many people who would be here to experience it and those who won't be here. And so I'm really excited about what someone's experience might be to look at the portraits, to listen to the podcast, and then watch the documentary and gather something. And I think we intend to make the script in the way that it has been, the way that I reorganized it, available to people. We're talking about maybe seeing if we get the music available to people. There was a woman after our first night, she was like, I really want the music. Like, I feel like I could listen to it and remember everything that happened. And she said, and I want to do that. And I was like, oh gosh, how do I make this happen for this woman? Yeah.
Bathe in a sea of Southern Baptist backyard blackness. Bathe in a sea of Southern Baptist backyard blackness.
I think there's something, I was trying to describe this to somebody without describing the plot, and I was like, it's blackity black. It also feels very Philly. There's something very distinctly of this place that this show feels. Maybe it's just because these stories, these dancers are very much rooted here, and their stories also are deeply rooted in this place. But I wonder, can this go somewhere else? Do you think that it could?
Why couldn't it?
And how? Well, what do you see?
I don't know.
Well, that's my thing. I was like, what's the next step? Like, we could do another run, but what else do you foresee if we're dreaming now at the end or the beginning?
I don't know. I think in multiple ways, and there's a part of me, and that's just because I've had to develop this muscle where I'm like, it goes, you know. It's better for it to go and have this desire for it to come back, and hopefully that means that these artists will be supported to make more of their own work.
Right.
You know, that's like, oh, that thing was amazing. Who was involved? And it's like, well, what are you doing? And then, you know, these natives, these residents, these artists here in Philadelphia should be supported, and or people who want to do. There was a young person who came up to me and they were like, I thought I wanted to do this. And I was like, what do you mean? They were like, I had this idea. And I was like, okay. And they were like, and then you did it. And I was like, sorry. And they were like, but no, like I couldn't have done it like this, but now I have this other idea. And I was like, then do it. And they were describing how healing the event was for them and how they wanted to keep that going. And I was like, all right, like keep it going, baton passed,
Right.
Live on,
That's
you know?
right.
So I think about that. And that's because that's my muscle, because of the work that I do. You know, I bounce around the world making and leaving. But this in particular, I don't know, I think it would be exciting if it found another home, like if it went to a different part of Philly, or if it went to a different section that we could, you know, find another community center, or like pop up, you know, we take all our shit, pop it up somewhere, do it for a night, pop ups. While we designed this particular place here at Neighborhood House, so specifically, I don't imagine that we couldn't just pop up. I imagine that there are a bunch of places. We need 30 by 30 space and, you
Bunch of
know, get the
furniture.
locals involved,
Right.
different parts of Philly, and just do the thing.
Can you talk a little bit about the intimacy? What's
We
it called?
call it chemical shift.
Can you talk about how that came about? Because that wasn't something that was planned necessarily, or at least I didn't know about it before the dancers came up with their own monologues and their gestures. How did that come about, and how did you see it kind of developing as we did the rehearsals to the performance?
Yeah, well, with my work in dance and theater, I think in dance it's not always the case, but in theater, for me, I am sometimes led to think about, well, actually, let me go back to, because this is something we've never talked about. You know, I was a poetry major in college.
Friday or Saturday night, a couple dozen of us black students making our way round to a grad student's crib off campus. Mushy sofa pushed in the corner, raggedy rug rolled upside the wall, making just enough space for 3 or 4 couples to alternate on the dance floor. Couples to alternate on the dance floor. Couples to alternate on the dance floor.
And when the child tells you to get your life, you had better get your life.
I remember when, you know, as a poetry major, one of my professors and I love studying. And I had some trouble just trying to figure out what I wanted my style or what my voice to be. And I don't want to mince my professor's words, but let's just say he felt that I rambled a lot in my poetry. And I was like, so? I was very much a fan of the stream of consciousness
I love
writers.
the stream
So
of- me too.
I'm like, well, so?
Deal with that.
And he said, I think, this is his opinion, and I have grown to identify and witness this, but he said, I think really great poetry always has two parts. And he said it could be a question and an answer. It could be a thought and a realization. It could be a thought and another thought. But there is a moment where something happens. And it changed my writing. Like, it was a very simple thing, and I was always just like, and then as I read poetry after that, I was like, oh my God, that's the second section.
moment.
Oh, that's the second section.
Right.
And so when I started creating more live performance, and I think about it again as like, I'm still writing, you know, this is I'm still writing. Where is that second half? And in theater, there's always like a conflict, right? There's, you know, what somebody wants something, and then there's something they have to overcome. And so I'm started to recognize these different kinds of things in different mediums. And so while we were building this, I kept being like, I initiated this thing where I said, y'all, I'm not feeling a catharsis. And they were like, why, what? And I was like, well, in some ways, we've made this work that's about emancipation or re-emancipation, which is to say about freeing oneself of something. And yet we are in a place where perhaps we all have done that. We're not embodied people. We are not people who have not processed how to find authenticity, or have not, you know, all the stories are memories. Everyone's talking in memories. So it's the show itself is in past tense.
Yeah.
And so it's like, we're not watching us actually relive. We are listening to us recount. And so there's no second part. There's no catharsis. I was like, maybe someone should get into a fight. Like, I thought about house parties, and I'm like, oh, like maybe we just stage a fight, and then
there's always that tension.
Exactly.
For strangers.
Exactly. And then that felt wrong. I was like, there was enough violence in the world. There's enough pretend violence in the world. And then it was a conversation where the cast and I talked about slow dancing, just like, oh, there's no like slow dance. And then I was like, but what is it about slow dance that we're actually after? Like, is it just like the image of slow dancing? And then we had this conversation. And I was like, oh, we should just have a conversation in the middle of the show to break the show, because again, I love process, and I'm like, how do we show our process? And then we practice having this conversation, for which I imagine if we had agreements or disagreements, that a little bit of tension may show up, because we don't all think the same, and we like that. And then there was a couple days where Layla wasn't here, so I was stepping into the conversations. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is great. When Layla comes back, she will lead. She's a teacher. She's good at speaking. She will lead these conversations in the show.
Right.
Layla came back, and I was like, Layla, okay, here's the deal. We've been having these conversations. We're going to have a conversation in the middle of the show. And it wants to bring up a number of different topics, but it wants to start talking about slow dancing as like, what is the place of slow dancing here? And to discover why slow dancing is an important role in social dance and what that does. And so I think I showed her what we did, or we kind of did it for her, and then I was like, do you want to try? And she was like kind of interested and kind of not interested. She was like, yeah, I'll do it. Like, okay, I get it. And then I was like, you know, this is that thing about listening, right? As a director, I'm like, okay, like, I'm realizing that this is important to me, that this is something that, like, as a contributor to this project, I'm like, this is actually, and I think about all my work. If anyone's ever seen my work, like, it is very intimate work. I think about intimacy all the time. I have a practice in finding intimacy in all of the work that I do in one way or another. And I was like, okay, I can't, I was struggling because I didn't want to be a part of the performance. This is about these Philly-based artists, and although my daughter is Philly-based, I was like, oh, but this is becoming important to me, and I'm realizing that the representation of slow dance in respect to this process and in respect to social dance is about intimacy, which we are all experiencing. But how can I, like, put a highlighter onto that? How can I bring us closer to feeling that? And then every day from that day, I just practice what it meant to talk about it and like have it be a conversation, and also in some ways like manufacture a moment that may or may not be real by the time it's over.
Well, you said when we were writing the grant, you said, I want people to see how culture is made in the moment. And I feel like that particular segment, we see it.
Yeah.
Especially also with Mark's segment about like hip hop. Like we're invited into this cultural, like it's demystified and deconstructed for us in a way. And I also love that you kind of come out from behind the DJ booth. Yeah. Right? I love how you became the DJ. And I love how you kind of break that wall between the audience. Like that was a big hallmark of what we wanted to do, was like break down this barrier between artists and audience. We didn't really know how that was going to manifest. Yeah. But it manifests when you come out and you just kind of walk around the room and look at everybody and they're like, wait, we're seeing the director. Yeah. Like, how is this possible?
If they know, they're like,
right, if they know, they're like, who is this?
Yeah.
Who is this person? And also then the Biscuits come out and you see our production manager, Katie, with her walkie-talkie on her belt, but she's handing out biscuits, you know? Or we see our lighting director, Itohan, up on the balcony dancing with us during those moments, right? Like a lot of moments where the backdrop pops out into the front and we see like the behind the scenes. And I feel like I'm always trying to, sometimes with performance, create a veneer or a facade that isn't necessarily authentic, right? And we work really, really hard to create that perfect, you know, face of the performance.
And I work really, really hard to break that thing.
Right.
That's like what I feel what I try to do so much of is I think there's something even particular about this project where I'm like, y'all are in this room. We are not going to pretend like y'all are not in this room. And it is as much of a performance as it is actually just these people's lives. And I think something like that, and this is what we call it chemical shift, because I'm like, their bodies have to go through something too. Their chemical needs to shift before they leave this room. And here's the moment to make it happen. They've gotten to know everybody. They've experienced many things. Now's the moment that y'all are in this too. You know, we're not calling it a house party for pretend. It's really meant to be something where you have to make a choice.
Right. That circle. You decide to step in the circle that Mark kind of inscribes with chalk, the hip hop circle, the ancestral circle that Leela and Nikki kind of create. The community that Jermaine created or was part of at college, that circle, and I love those are the beauty of all of those circles overlapping. Right. That what is social dance but an amalgamation of all of these different dance forms.
And also the way I think that Ra sort of punctures that too as well. And I think people don't know with Ra as well as like, is this a performance? And I'm like, it is, but it is also this human being that is, in my opinion, I would say like a disruptor, someone who is like on the edge of things. And that's, you know, that is, it's not just for the sake of this. This is how this person lives.
Left with a thick husk, primed for ruckus.
Performers are showing up. I wonder how they feel. I just hope they had a good time. I think that's most important to me is I hope they feel seen. I hope they feel perhaps a little bit changed. I hope that they're proud of what they have done and that they see each other. And yeah, that's somehow really important to me. Gotta figure out why, but I want that for them.
Me too. I think about kind of the list of dancers that we had and how we kind of whittled it down to this 5. Some of our dancers whittled themselves away.
Yeah.
But it feels like it always had to be this group.
For sure.
And we were so thoughtful about kind of researching, like you talked about loving researching these dancers, seeing what, like finding that like little spark in each of them that we thought, oh, that could develop into something. We didn't know what it was. Yeah. We didn't know how the embers would catch on to each other. But there is something very like if we're talking about being in a living room, in some ways we have become family. Like we've shared a house together.
The cliches are so annoying, but
Yeah, I know.
when they work, they're real.
That's real.
Because I was going to say that, and I was like, that's such a cliche.
No, I'm going to say it.
But it's real. I mean, I said it to you last night, too, and I was like,
Yes.
oh my God, like, while we've been working on this particular project for 2 years, we have met a little over 4 years ago. And yeah, I don't know. I just feel like I can't really commit to something unless I feel really umbilical to it, and I feel that with this. I mean, I've been driving back and forth from New York to Philadelphia. I brought my kid. Like, you know, it's really important to me. And Patrice, who maybe I didn't mention earlier, but who also has been such a star on this project, working behind the scenes, said to me last night, like, it's amazing because I know all that you have going on, and yet you like come in the room, and it really meant a lot to me that she felt like I was like really chill and like able to like lead with grace and present. And I was like, well, this is really important. It's really important to me.
You know, the very first play that I read that moved me was For Color Girls by Ntozake Shange.
Who? I'm kidding. Can you imagine?
Right?
Into what?
But there are people who
I'm sure,
who are very much about theater and don't know that work.
Yeah, well.
And that has been my kind of journey into theater and being of and not of it, because of how that play kind of also exists within the world of theater. But it feels like in poetry, exactly. That's the multidisciplinarity of that for me was what was truly inspiring, and the lesson that I had to keep learning about it. The more it kind of followed me, because I've been in that play, I've directed that play, I've thought about writing things like that play. I definitely did like bite off of Ntozake Shange as a middle school playwright. You know, just writing a play that was pretty much the same format. But I also see it in everything. Like I see the influence of that work in everything. And it also is just like one of those blueprints, I guess, for the way I think about like what makes powerful theater, what makes like truly intimate, community-based theater. And I think about Ntozake Shange's process for that was that all of the women, the ladies, in their different colors, she wrote all of the work. You know, that's a big difference here. But she invited each of them to kind of perform their work in bars and on the West Coast to kind of develop the performative aspect of it with an audience and people. And I feel like I could come up with lots of ways to compare this performance to that really like ancestral piece, right? And as we talk about the lineages of social dance, you know, drawing out from Hucklebuck to this project, there's just so much conversation between past and present that I think I'm enjoying a lot in the work that I'm doing right now. It's a big theme in the work that I'm doing at Monument Lab, but also the more personal work. We're here at Christ Church, which is this very, like one of the oldest places in Philadelphia. We're in the oldest neighborhood in Philadelphia, Old City, the historic district of Philadelphia. And this is the church where Absalom Jones, who became the first African-American Episcopal priest, was enslaved to a vestryman of the church. So there's all these contradictions about slavery and freedom. Second and Market, there was a whipping post for slaves out there. We're like footsteps away from the waterfront where enslaved folks came to Philadelphia for the first time. That's where they disembarked. Those ghosts are here.
Just being aware that that's what's around.
Right. And what ghosts were we dancing with last night? Like, I know Leela brought up some ghosts.
Yeah.
You know, we were all kicking up. Mickey's dad is in the room. You know, a lot of our folks who have become ancestors were in the room. We bring those into the room with us, particularly when we dance. I feel my aunts when I dance, my great aunts who used to do the bops, and they had their little two steps and stuff. And then, I literally had my mom and my dad in the room last night, and my son and my husband, like the most important people to me. For me, that is the kind of work that I'm always trying to do, is the work that my family can be a part of and understand. When I was in grad school writing very experimental avant-garde poetry at Temple, I remember after I wrote my thesis, which was a book of poems, I felt almost like, I got distinguished honors on it, but I felt almost like a failure, because I was like, this is a book that none of my aunts would be able to understand.
Right.
This is a book that my great-grandmother, if she was still alive, she'd be like, baby, what is going on here? What are you doing with the words? And last night, my mother left with that look that Jermaine had on her face, of like light coming from her face, of like, wow. And she said, people need this. People need to be able to dance in public like this. I don't have any spaces like that where I can do that. I haven't seen my mom dance in public in years. And I haven't, never seen my parents slow drag, So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it was kind of heavy. Like, were we breaking some generational cycles of trauma?
I think so.
Is that what we out here doing?
I think so. Yeah.
I think that's super deep. And every performer probably had moments like that. And a lot of us had our parents in the room. Your mom was in the room.
That's right. I forgot.
Leela's mom was in the room.
Yeah.
Okay? Like, my mom, it was, there's Katie, our production manager's mom and dad were in the room.
Yeah.
So something about the fact that, not every performance that I've done in Philadelphia commands that type of family presence.
Yeah.
This felt powerfully intimate in that way, that it's not outside of us. This is something that's coming very much from the inside. And we created a safe space with the vulnerability that you cultivated in the storytelling. And I will be sitting with that for a really long time, just sitting in awe of it, sitting in, literally weeping inside of my soul about how this happened and the beauty of it and the simplicity of it, right? There's like it's not overwrought. There's some very subtle, nuanced touches that structured it, but made it feel like a very open world that people could enter into. Once they step through those doors, It is a new place. It is a place that does not exist anymore, and a place that doesn't yet exist.
Thank you for inviting me to do it.
Thank you. I said it. Thank you for sharing your spotlight.
Oh my God. What?
You got a grand ass spotlight all over New York and Broadway.
Please.
I mean, people say your name and it's like, and I'm like, but that's just my brother from another mother.
Yeah. See, that's what's real.
That's my brother.
The spotlight is not, but our connection is.
Yeah, that's real.
Yeah.
That's real. So, yeah. You Philly now.
Yeah.
You Philly now.
Yeah. I'm a Philly John.
Yeah. Philly loves you. Philly loves you. So, come back. Don't be a stranger.
I'm not gonna be a stranger.
Be a John. Be a stranger. Don't be a stranger. Be a John.
Love that. Oh my God, that's really great.
Right?
Philly, call us. We got the tagline. Don't be a stranger. Be a John.
Well, thank you, Raja.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure.
All right.
My absolute pleasure.
Re-emancipate.
Every day.
Every fucking day.
Re-emancipate every day.
Re-emancipate every fucking day. That's a wrap. Raja that.
And now we've come to the end of the party. Thanks for dancing with us. This episode of the Re-Emancipation of Social Dance podcast was produced by V. Shane Frederick with Nia Benjamin and Yolanda Wisher for Intercultural Journeys. For more information about the podcast and project, visit reemancipatedance.org. The Re-Emancipation of Social Dance has been supported by the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage. The views expressed are those of the artist and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage or the Pew Charitable Trusts. Now, you don't have to go home, but you've got to get the heck up out of here. Peace.